In the past, many large factories settled in Shenzhen and Guangzhou, creating numerous employment opportunities and making Shenzhen the third largest city after Beijing and Shanghai. However, Shenzhen's economic situation has worsened, with many people now sleeping on the streets and in front of the station. Official figures released by the Chinese Communist Party show that the number of newly registered unemployed residents in Shenzhen in the first quarter of this year increased by 40% year-on-year and 15% from the fourth quarter of last year. According to the South China Morning Post, this unemployment statistic may be incomplete, as many laid-off workers haven't been recorded or reported, meaning the official number may represent only a portion of the unemployed. Furthermore, the 2024 College Student Employment Research Report, released by the China Zhaopin recruitment platform, shows that, as of mid-October, only 38% of graduates received informal employment notices. A survey by Guangdong University of Technology revealed an employment rate of just 41% for this year's graduates, meaning as many as 60% are unemployed. A recent viral video shows a large number of people, including children, sleeping in the square in front of Longhua bus station in Shenzhen, Guangdong. Chinese netizens believe most of these individuals came from rural areas seeking work, but with jobs scarce and no extra money for basic accommodations, they are forced to sleep on the streets, waiting for opportunities. Some netizens pointed out that this scene occurred as early as last year, and the tragic situation has worsened dramatically this year. Young people across China are sleeping on streets, in pipes, and underground passages. Even cinemas have become makeshift sleeping places. While youth are often associated with vigor and fashion, China's economic decline has left many young people sleeping on the streets due to job scarcity. In July 2024, many people slept in Longhua bus station square in Shenzhen. The video shows numerous individuals sleeping on the ground, with many young people sitting in the square playing on their phones. The video subtitles read, "This year's unemployment rate is higher than in previous years." In previous years, there weren't as many people wandering and sleeping on the streets. This year, sleeping on the ground can be seen everywhere in stations, parks, and squares. It's clear how difficult it is to find a job this year. Some netizens say it will get even harder in the future, with possibly no work at all. It's terrifying to think about. A netizen also posted a photo of a child sleeping near Longhua bus station, showing a young man sitting on the ground, sleeping on his arms. On June 29, 2024, a netizen named Truth Media posted on Twitter that, on June 25th, young people were sleeping under a bridge waiting for recruitment letters from factories. They mentioned that Jiangsu province is now full of stranded students, competing for hourly wages of just 13 to 14 yuan. The number of young people sleeping on the streets has risen in recent years as China's economy continues to decline. Many factories in Guangdong have closed, leading to widespread job losses and forcing people to live temporarily on the streets. According to incomplete statistics, unemployment, bankruptcy, and homelessness in major Chinese cities, such as Shanghai, Beijing, and Chongqing, are similar to what has been recorded in Shenzhen. Hundreds of major Japanese and Taiwanese corporations leave China over fears of being held hostage. Faced with growing threats from Beijing, Japanese, Taiwanese, and other companies are now accelerating their exit from China. On July 23rd, Japan's Nippon Steel announced that it would end its 20-year joint venture with China's Baosteel. The contract will expire at the end of August. Nippon Steel has found it difficult to expand its business in China and plans to shift investment to India and the United States. Nippon Steel also stated that it plans to sell all of its shares in the joint venture with China's Baosteel for $241 million, though the sale will require regulatory approval. During the joint venture, Nippon Steel sued China's Baosteel in a Japanese court in 2021, accusing the Chinese side of stealing Japanese patents on electroplated steel sheets, which China supplies to Toyota for electric vehicles. The case is still ongoing. This is a typical example of foreign companies rushing to withdraw from China. On July 12th, Japanese construction machinery manufacturer Kato Works announced the dissolution and liquidation of its subsidiary that produces and sells hydraulic excavators in Kunshan, Jiangsu. Construction machinery company Kato Nakajima also announced that it would liquidate in August to exit the Chinese market. This trend is spreading from the manufacturing sector to the beauty products sector, with high-end skincare brands such as Shiseido also announcing their withdrawal from the Chinese market. Shiseido's flagship stores in China have recently stopped accepting new orders and have begun to close. Another Japanese company, Bridgestone, has also announced its withdrawal after more than 20 years of operations in China. Bridgestone has ceased producing and selling commercial tires in China and will likely focus on high-performance passenger tires. According to public information, in the past year, most of the globally renowned companies leaving China have been Japanese. These include manufacturing plants of Canon, Sony, Toshiba, and Nikon. Other companies that have exited China include Amazon, LinkedIn, and the R&D center of Astellas Pharmaceuticals. These companies have moved their supply chains to Thailand, the Philippines, or back home. Taiwanese companies face threats from China and seek refuge in other ways. Faced with threats from the Beijing government, Taiwanese companies are now seeking refuge in various ways. French media have expressed concern that China's hegemonic ambitions toward Taiwan have made Taiwan's leading technology companies worry about the worst-case scenarios. As a result, some companies are considering setting up a second headquarters outside Taiwan. Taiwanese companies have long outsourced a large part of their production. Foxconn, the world's leading computer equipment manufacturer and a subcontractor for Apple, Amazon, and Microsoft, focuses most of its business in China, but also operates in Europe, Brazil, and Mexico. TSMC, a semiconductor giant that manufactures for companies such as Nvidia and Apple, has just announced the construction of a second factory in Arizona, USA, with an investment of more than $65 billion, including $6.6 billion in subsidies from the U.S. government. Singapore and the Netherlands are priority locations for Taiwan's semiconductor IC industry to expand its factories. The trend of foreign capital withdrawal from China has been a hot topic since 2023. Earlier this year, global asset management firm Knight Frank analyzed that this trend is still ongoing. To calm public opinion, China's Ministry of Commerce stated that the inflow and outflow of foreign capital are in line with market rules, and that the narrative of foreign companies fleeing has been exaggerated and incited by external forces. Xinhua News Agency, the media outlet of the Chinese Communist Party, even criticized foreign companies for being foolish. Xinhua propaganda asserted that the best investment opportunities in the future still lie in China, and that leaving China would only mean missing out on these opportunities. A commentator noted that the deteriorating business environment in China is driving foreign capital to leave, with many foreign companies moving to Southeast Asia, India, and even returning to their home countries, such as the United States, Japan, and South Korea. These companies come to China to do business and make money, not to engage in charity work. A netizen named Trin Tai Rose suggested that foreign companies are reluctant to leave China because of its well-established supply chain and cheap labor force. However, in the past 3 to 5 years, not only have the remaining 100 Japanese companies left, but also other companies from Taiwan, Korea, the US, Germany, the UK, and even some Chinese enterprises have withdrawn from China. Japanese camera giant Nikon shut down its subsidiary Nikon Imaging in China. The world's largest hard drive maker Seagate closed its factory in Suzhou. Suzuki withdrew all shares from 2 subsidiaries in China. Nitto Denko Group closed its Suzhou factory and withdrew from China. Apple assemblers plan to move production lines to Taiwan or Southeast Asia. In 2019, South Korea's Samsung Electronics closed its factory in Huizhou, ending phone production in China and shifting to India, Vietnam, and other Southeast Asian countries. Japanese office equipment company Ricoh moved its photocopier production lines to Thailand. KF sold its China business to SNH. In 2020, British supermarket chain Tesco announced that it would completely withdraw from the Chinese market. Dutch company Philips sold its home appliance business to Hill House Capital and exited the home appliance market in China. American clothing retailer Old Navy announced its withdrawal from the Chinese market and closed all its physical and online stores in the country. In 2021, Yahoo stopped providing products and services in China. Toshiba closed its last factory in Dalian. Japanese electronics manufacturer Oki ceased its printer and copier manufacturing operations in China. In 2022, Canon closed its factory in Zhuhai, moving production lines to Japan. South Korea's Lotte Group closed its last department store in China, dissolved its headquarters in China, and increased investment in Southeast Asia. Apple announced that iPhones would be assembled and manufactured in an Indian factory. In 2023, Sony moved its main factory to Thailand. Citibank left China. Supermarket group Carrefour left China. U.S. asset management giant Vanguard and performance consulting firm Gallup announced they would close their operations in China and leave the country. The top leaders of the Chinese Communist Party have successively announced a so-called economic rescue plan, and the Politburo held an economic meeting in September, which is an unusual occurrence. However, some analysts say that while the Chinese economy may respond quickly, China is not far from becoming another Zimbabwe. In addition to the central bank's announcement of interest rate cuts, reductions in the reserve requirement ratio, and printing money to boost the stock market, the Chinese Communist Party also announced plans to distribute red envelopes to low-income individuals. On the 26th, Reuters revealed that the Ministry of Finance of the Chinese Communist Party will issue bonds worth 2 trillion yuan, part of which will be used to subsidize old-for-new exchanges. Another portion will be allocated to families with 2 or more children, providing 800 yuan per child per month, as well as assisting local governments with debt relief. The Chinese Communist Party also plans to gradually increase financial support for small and medium-sized enterprises. In short, the Chinese Communist Party is attempting to plug various holes in the economy simultaneously. The reason for this is quite clear. At the Politburo's economic meeting on September 26th, party leader Xi Jinping unusually admitted that new situations and problems have emerged in China's economy. The self-media outlet Financial Truth commented on social media that the CCP violated normal procedures by holding an economic meeting in September for the first time, and by giving direct financial aid to the poor for the first time. This shows that the Chinese economy has reached an extremely dangerous point. At the very least, those in Beijing feel that the safety of the nation is at risk. The collapse of the Chinese economy has opened the possibility for social unrest, which could shake the CCP's rule. On the 26th, Li Chengpeng wrote that Chinese people once knelt to the government in groups, then jumped off buildings and bridges in groups, and now it has become common to kill officials. This reflects a transition from belief in a better future to despair, where one life is exchanged for another, a symbol of the times. Li Chengpeng compared it to the tragic Jiangnan slave rebellion in the late Ming dynasty, when servants in Jiangnan, the richest region, suddenly rose up and killed the wealthy and powerful. Notable figures like Dong Qichang, Xu Xiake, and Gu Yanwu all suffered as a result, and soon after, Emperor Chongzhen hanged himself at Coal Hill. Regarding Beijing's economic rescue efforts, Li Chengpeng remarked that only a normal economic system has an economic cycle, and prescribing the right remedy is what constitutes a real rescue plan. Now, experts say that solving China's economic problems is like a medicine vendor saying, you catch a flea, pry open its mouth, administer the medicine, and the disease will be cured. News Investigation commented that the main strategy of these economic rescue policies is to print money. First, the central bank announced that it would print money to save the stock market. The Politburo then held a meeting, encouraging the financial sector to spend more on infrastructure, ensure the delivery of housing projects, and support bankrupt real estate companies. If money runs out, The central bank will print more. This essentially reverts the central bank and the finance department, which were separated in 1994, to the model where the government can print money at will. This is alarming. It's like they're preparing to set off a grand firework at the end, turning China into another Zimbabwe. News investigation predicted that within a year, hyperinflation will hit, and another large economic cycle will begin. I feel sad for the people at the bottom, but there's no other option. Those who can leave the country will do so urgently, stockpiling US dollars, gold, and food to prepare for the coldest and longest winter. New situation in China's economy. The Politburo holds rare meeting as Xi Jinping acknowledges challenges. The meeting was chaired by Xi Jinping, leader of the Communist Party of China. During the meeting, it was acknowledged that new situations and new problems have emerged in China's economy, and the call was made to face difficulties and strengthen confidence. Some economists noted that the phrase, new situations and new problems, indicates that time is pressing, and the tasks ahead are formidable. The Politburo of the Communist Party of China, composed of 24 members, is considered the second most powerful body within the party. The meeting recognized that challenges have arisen in China's economy, stressing the need to face difficulties and strengthen confidence, and to work hard to complete the annual economic and social development goals and tasks. In addition to pledging to meet the year's economic targets, the meeting also vowed to prevent further declines in the real estate market. Bloomberg reported that this seems to be the strongest commitment yet to halt the real estate market's free fall and attempt to stabilize prices. The briefing of the meeting, as published by the Communist Party's official media, stated that efforts must be made to stop the decline in the real estate market and stimulate a stable recovery, while also calling for measures to address the concerns of the public. The second highest authority in the Communist Party emphasized that the government would strictly control the addition of new housing projects and focus on completing unfinished ones as part of an effort to ease the housing oversupply. Bruce Pang, chief economist for Greater China at JLL, remarked, "The stimulus plan approved by the Politburo today represents a strategic shift in macroeconomic policy, moving from scattered policies to a more balanced and coordinated plan." He added that the mention of new situations and problems shows that time is tight and the task is arduous. It is noteworthy that the Politburo typically discusses the current economic situation during meetings held in April, July, and December. According to official documents, the last time such a meeting occurred outside these months was in March 2020, when China was dealing with the coronavirus pandemic. Over the past 4 years, September meetings have primarily focused on internal party discipline or organizational matters. Therefore, media outlets have found it unexpected and rare for the Politburo to convene in September to discuss economic issues.
Sound the alarm. A crisis is about to hit China. Banks are the last safe haven for most Chinese families to store their assets. Before 2019, the expansion of the real estate bubble had already put widespread pressure on the banking industry. The Chinese economic recession following the burst of the real estate bubble once again exerted pressure on the banking system. And now China's banking industry has fallen into a dangerous situation. Since few people understand the operating conditions of the banking system, this article analyzes for readers why China's banking crisis has emerged. In short, this upcoming banking crisis is jointly caused by governments at all levels, and the financial crisis indicates that China will face storms coming and winds filling the building in the near future. A trend in the banking industry: layoffs, salary cuts, and senior executive resignations. Recently, Chinese listed companies have successively announced their first-half financial reports. some media have discovered an important phenomenon. Banks are facing significant issues. China Fund News reported first on September 3rd, followed by Beijing Business Daily on September 4th, stating that among the total 2.55 million employees across all Chinese banks, the workforce of 42 listed banks decreased by 40,000 in just half a year, with the 6 state-owned banks reducing their staff by more than 20,000, while other medium-sized banks laid off 20,000 employees. At the same time, the average salary in the banking industry for the first half of this year decreased by 5,321 yuan compared to the first half of last year, resulting in an average monthly salary reduction of 887 yuan. 3 points need special clarification here. First, the listed banks are all leaders in the financial industry, with large-scale and wide service scope. When these leaders began to lay off employees and cut salaries, the situation for smaller local banks is likely even worse. Second, banks often pay the previous year's year-end bonus in the first half of the following year, so the salary of bank employees in the first half of this year includes that year-end bonus. Consequently, even with the bonus included, the average bank employee this year has earned over 5,000 yuan less than the same period last year, which is a clear sign of the bank's operational difficulties. Third, the 6 state-owned banks mentioned in this news are all giants in China's financial sector, with business operations covering the entire country. The leader, Industrial and Commercial Bank of China, is the world's largest bank in terms of assets. The lending scale of these 6 state-owned banks accounts for 60% to 70% of China's banking industry. The fact that they still had to lay off 20,000 employees indicates that these giant banks are facing difficulties similar to those of small and medium-sized banks. Another indicator of the financial industry's distress is that in the past month, more than 1,100 executives from listed companies have resigned, including those at the chairman, vice chairman, or general manager levels. Half of these executives are from the financial industry, and in some banks, multiple executives have resigned simultaneously. China's banks are all established by the government and controlled by governments at various levels. The chairman, vice chairman, and general manager are appointed by their superior government bodies. Bank executives who wish to resign must submit their resignations to the relevant government departments. In fact, only a small number have been approved, while most bank executives who want to resign have not been allowed to. The top leaders of the Communist Party of China are concerned that the resignation of a large number of banking executives will cause social panic and hasten the financial crisis. Now, many senior executives in the banking industry are afraid that if they continue to stay in their positions, their banks may go bankrupt, leading to personal accountability and imprisonment. As a result, they seek to leave before their banks collapse. What about depositors? Do they transfer their deposits to giant banks, believing those banks are too big to fail and will keep their assets safe? Banks have long been regarded as golden rice bowls. Now, with senior executives resigning and employees facing layoffs and salary cuts, China's banking industry is indeed showing alarming warning signs. How do banks survive? In the past 2 years, due to the continuous recession of China's economy, many small and medium-sized enterprises have gone bankrupt, and their owners have withdrawn operating funds from daily operations and deposited large amounts in banks. After banks collect a large amount of deposits, are they safe and sound? In fact, banks are not the owners of these deposits. They are only entrusted by depositors to manage these funds. Therefore, for banks, depositors' deposits are actually liabilities, and banks owe depositors. Moreover, banks must pay interest on these deposits. For banks, deposit interest is a cost. The more deposits they collect, the greater the cost. The income of bank operations comes from the interest earned from lending. Every bank must find reliable loan customers for the depositors' money and collect loan interest on time to pay deposit interest to customers. The daily operation of the bank also requires personnel and office expenses. When the bank's interest income is deducted from its interest expenses, the remaining difference allows the bank to maintain daily personnel and office expenses. This difference is what the financial industry typically calls the net interest margin, calculated as the bank's total interest income, the bank's total interest expenses. All interest-bearing assets. If a bank's net interest margin exceeds its personnel and office costs, the bank will make a profit. Conversely, if the net interest margin is less than these costs, the bank will incur losses. In the first half of this year, China's banking industry generally cut salaries because large and small banks suffered losses, leading them to cut salaries and lay off employees. When the economy is booming, there is a shortage of funds in the market, and the bank's loan interest rate will be relatively high, which results in a relatively high net interest margin. However, when the economy is depressed, the operating conditions of most loan companies deteriorate, and they cannot afford high loan interest rates. To stimulate economic recovery, the central bank will often cut interest rates to help companies reduce costs. Such financial policies harm banks, as the bank's interest income continues to shrink due to these rate cuts. According to international banking standards, the warning threshold for a sustainable net interest margin is 1.8%. If the net interest margin falls below this level, banks will start to lose money. For China's state-owned banks, the net interest margin fell below 2% in the first quarter of 2022 and continued to decline. By the fourth quarter of 2023, the net interest margin of state-owned banks had fallen below 1.5%, entering the danger zone. In the first half of this year, the net interest margin of the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China was only 1.43%. Figures for the second half of the year are not yet available, but they are expected to be even lower. If banks are unable to make ends meet and suffer serious losses, they may deplete residents' deposits to survive. Why is the situation of the world's largest bank, the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China, so precarious? There is an additional reason behind these institutional losses. It is a state-owned bank, and its funds are subject to central government control. The central government has long used ICBC's deposits to subsidize state-owned enterprises with significant losses, leading to high levels of bad debt that it cannot absorb. The Chinese Communist Party has made a major policy shift to stimulate the economy, but third-quarter GDP remains disappointing, and the housing market continues to fall. Authorities have rarely lowered the reserve requirement ratio and interest rates continuously. The 6 major state-owned banks lowered deposit rates twice in July and on October 18th. Before the stock market opened on the 21st, the People's Bank of China announced a 25 basis point cut to both the 1-year and 5-year LPRs, marking one of the largest rate cuts in history. Scholar Wang Guochen previously assessed that the Chinese Communist Party's financial system could face major problems in November, and it remains uncertain whether it can endure through this year. The Chinese Communist Party has set a target of maintaining GDP growth at 5%. It was rumored that the CCP's economic stimulus measures were released at the end of September because the GDP target was difficult to meet and the data was worse than expected. The third-quarter GDP growth rate of 4.6% announced recently is the lowest rate in CCP data since early 2023. Many are concerned about China's real economy, but issues like data manipulation may mean that even top CCP leaders are unaware of the true state of the economy. China's hard times are set to continue. 3 terrible phenomena are sweeping the country. Recently, inflation data in China for September was released, with the prices of fresh vegetables, pork, and fresh fruits rising by 22.9%, 16.2%, and 6.7%, respectively. Among them, the price of vegetables rose by 22.9% in 1 month. Some vegetables saw a larger short-term increase. For example, the month-on-month increase in green peppers and tomatoes in September was as high as 45.6% and 35.2%, respectively. Leading most foods, the price increase is too fast. People all over the country are shouting, "I really can't afford it." And this price surge is partly due to natural disasters. This year, heavy rainfall and high temperatures in many places have not only restricted the growth of vegetables, but also aggravated the difficulties of harvesting and transportation, causing the prices at the place of production to rise steadily. As for the future market, some researchers said that in October, when the temperature in most parts of the country was higher than the same period in previous years, Production conditions were good, and with the weather gradually cooling, the transportation, storage losses, and transportation costs of vegetables decreased. If there is no disastrous weather, vegetable prices will gradually fall back and enter the seasonal downward range. Of course, in addition to natural factors, the impact of human factors cannot be ignored behind the soaring vegetable prices. China's agricultural industry chain is complex, the management level is not high, and the storage and processing technology of agricultural products lags behind, which also causes a large amount of vegetables to be lost during transportation, further raising vegetable prices. In the face of such a situation, to ensure the stability of vegetable prices in the future and reduce seasonal fluctuations, the most important thing is to improve the connection between production and sales, strengthen the construction of agricultural production infrastructure, improve the level of agricultural science and technology, and improve the market regulation mechanism. Otherwise, under the fluctuation of supply and demand, you won't be able to afford tomatoes and spinach this time, and next time, you may not be able to eat onions. Rising unemployment rate. Many companies are laying off employees and cutting salaries, and it is becoming more and more difficult to find a job. Some people can't find a job they like for several months. Even graduates from prestigious universities such as 985 and 211 also face employment pressure. The number of fresh graduates this year exceeds 10 million, and the demand for corporate recruitment has decreased, but the number of people looking for jobs is increasing. The National Bureau of Statistics previously released the unemployment rate data for August. Data shows that the unemployment rate of urban laborers aged 16 to 24, excluding students in school, reached 18.8%, up 1.7% from the previous month. In September, the National Bureau of Statistics released the latest urban unemployment rate data, showing that the National Urban Survey unemployment rate reached 5.1%. Experts pointed out that the rise in unemployment is not only a manifestation of weak economic recovery, but also reflects changes in industry structure and a mismatch between supply and demand of human resources. The demand for recruitment in many high-skilled positions has increased, while low-skilled and labor-intensive positions have continued to shrink. This structural unemployment phenomenon is difficult to effectively solve in the short term and must be improved through joint efforts of all parties. Recently, the 2023 Individual Tax Clearance Data Report has been released. The proportion of people who do not need to pay personal income tax in the country exceeds 70%. In 2023, 67 million people will benefit from the Special Additional Deduction Policy, and taxpayers with an annual income of less than 100,000 yuan basically do not need to pay personal income tax. Combined with the data of each sub-item in the report, the more realistic data structure of Chinese income levels can be summarized. 745 million people earn less than 10,000 yuan a month. About 20 million people earn more than 100,000 yuan a year. About 12 million people earn more than 150,000 yuan a year. 7.3 million people earn between 150,000 and 1 million yuan a year. Only 700,000 people earn more than 1 million yuan a year. That is to say, if you earn 150,000 yuan a year, you are already considered a rich person. Many companies can no longer pay wages. Some netizens said that their company has not been able to pay wages on time for almost 3 months, and people in the office are panicking, worrying that the company will suddenly go bankrupt one day. Little do they know that the delay in paying wages is not because the boss deliberately refuses to pay, but because there is really no money in the account. Sometimes the company needs to raise money from various sources just to pay wages. According to The Economist, the vacancy rate of Green Creation Plaza, a 5-star park in Hangzhou Future Science and Technology City, has reached 1/3, which is basically the same as last year and has not improved. EFC, European and American Financial City, is an office building with a relatively low vacancy rate in the Future Science and Technology City. Last year, the vacancy rate was around 20%, but this year it has clearly exceeded 20%. Not only has the vacancy rate increased, but rents are also falling. This is a nationwide phenomenon, including first-tier cities such as Beijing, Shanghai, and Shenzhen. No city's office buildings have remained strong. From Grade A office buildings to ordinary office buildings, there was some structural decline in previous years, and now they are all facing this problem. The main reason is that there are fewer companies now, and companies need fewer people. Some companies have laid off employees, and the workload that was originally completed by 3 people is now being done by 2 or even 1 person. How do ordinary people survive the economic downturn? First of all, work hard to make money. This is what you need most, or even the only thing to do during an economic depression. Don't always talk about grand narratives. What you need to do is to work hard to earn every penny and make sure you and your family don't fall into poverty. Secondly, at work, try not to be willful and don't quit without a plan. Whether it's 996 or 896, in this environment, no one has it easy, including your boss, who is very likely living a more miserable and stressful life than you. A job is not only the guarantee of your basic living security, but also the necessary painful reality that helps you maintain the desire and vitality of most of your cells. Don't start a business unless you have to. If you really want to try, explore those light asset businesses, preferably those that require almost no capital investment. In terms of family asset allocation, try to be conservative. Try not to buy a house, don't leverage, don't take loans, and don't easily upgrade your consumption. If you want to manage your finances, then trust in the destiny of mankind and invest in some technology index ETFs that can represent the direction of humanity's evolution, or allocate funds to long-term, low-volatility fixed income products. IMF lowers China's 2024 economic growth forecast. Stimulus measures are unlikely to be effective. According to Financial News, the International Monetary Fund, IMF, estimates that the U.S. economic growth rate this year and next year will be 2.8% and 2.2%, which is higher than the previous forecast, mainly due to stronger consumption. In China, due to the weakness of the real estate industry and low consumer confidence, the IMF lowered China's 2024 economic growth forecast and bluntly stated that the Chinese Communist Party authorities' economic stimulus measures are still not enough to substantially boost economic growth. IMF chief economist Pierre-Olivier Gourinchas. For China, as I mentioned at the beginning, we have slightly revised down its economic growth in 2024 to 4.8%, compared to our July forecast. This revision is mainly due to the weakness in the second quarter of this year, which reflects the continued decline in household and business confidence, as well as the ongoing problems in China's real estate sector, which is, of course, the top priority for the Chinese authorities to address right now. In our assessment, the measures announced by the People's Bank of China at the end of last month are generally moving in the right direction, but are not enough to substantially boost economic growth, which is why our forecast remains at around 4.8% in 2024 and remains unchanged at 4.5% next year.
According to recent data from the Chinese Communist Party's National Bureau of Statistics, have the Chinese people really become rich? Is it true? Yes, some have indeed become rich. But unfortunately, only a small number of people have accumulated wealth. Although the Chinese Communist Party has never dared to disclose data on the gap between the rich and the poor, clues can be found in reports from financial companies, banks, and consulting firms. In 2023, CICC released data showing that China's total wealth is 790 trillion yuan, with total private property amounting to 430 trillion yuan. Of this, 290 trillion yuan belongs to 4.6 million wealthy people, 110 trillion yuan to 99 million middle-class people, and the remaining 30 trillion yuan to 300 million ordinary people. What does this mean? It shows that the 4.6 million wealthy individuals have an average asset of 63 million yuan per person. The 99 million middle-class people hold an average of 1.11 million yuan per person, while the remaining 1.3 billion ordinary people only have an average of 23,000 yuan, about $3,200 per person. It's no exaggeration to call them the proletariat. Essentially, the wealthiest 0.33% of the population owns 67% of the country's wealth, while 92.77% of the population owns only 7%, which is a mere fraction of the rich's holdings. There must be 2,739 poor people, each with an average income of less than 30,000 yuan, to equal one rich person with an average income of 60 million yuan. In addition, China Merchants Bank also provided data for reference. 0.07% of the wealthy hold a total of 3.74 trillion yuan in deposits, accounting for 31% of total bank deposits. Another 2.18% of the population, considered the second-tier wealthy, hold around 6 trillion yuan in deposits, representing 50.3% of the total. Meanwhile, 97.75% of the poor hold just 2.22 trillion yuan in deposits, which is only 18.7% of the total, with an average personal account holding of only 12,500 yuan. These figures reflect the statement made by former Premier Li Keqiang, who noted that 600 million people in the country have a monthly income of less than 2,000 yuan, a number that may even be optimistic. The latest data released by the CCP reveals another secret. Over 70% of people do not need to pay personal income tax. If an individual's annual income is less than 100,000 yuan, they are essentially exempt from paying income tax. In other words, most people have little to no money. This data does not include the super invisible rich who do not declare their wealth, but it does show that the top 1% of earners pay 50% of taxes, while the top 10% pay over 90%. From this, we can conclude that China's wealth gap is far beyond people's imagination, with a very small number of people holding vast wealth. The wealth gap in China has exceeded that of the United States. These figures are astounding, but more frightening is that China's wealth gap has been widening over the years. In 2023, Sunflower clients accounted for only 2.4% of China Merchants Bank's customer base, but held 81.2% of the total assets. In 2007, Sunflower clients held just 55.1% of assets. Minsheng Bank follows a similar pattern. Based on these calculations, 20 million Chinese elites hold 118.1 trillion yuan in deposits, while the other 1.4 billion people collectively hold only 29.5 trillion yuan, along with 81.6 trillion yuan in loans. This shows that most Chinese people are struggling. Another worrying issue is that after the current round of economic rescue efforts, the wealth gap will likely widen further. Retail investors have pumped around 3 trillion yuan into the stock market, but listed companies are cashing out, and institutions are profiting and moving funds elsewhere. Once the rescue is complete, most retail investors could be wiped out. Xinhua Daily Telegraph published an article on February 24, 2023, titled "Rich and Poor Divide Tears Apart American Society," criticizing the United States for having the richest 1% of households owning over 20% of the country's total wealth, and this proportion continues to rise significantly. However, the article fails to mention that as of the first quarter of 2021, the top 10% of Americans held 69.8% of total net assets. The proportion of American adults living in middle-income households fell from 61% in 1971 to 51% in 2019. China claims to have more than 200 million middle-class citizens. The poverty rate in the United States reached 11.4% in 2020, with 37 million people still living below the poverty line. But if the World Bank's standard of $5.5 per day per person is applied, China has 600 million people living in poverty. This is consistent with what Premier Li Keqiang stated during the National People's Congress in May 2020, when he said there are 600 million people with low to middle incomes, with an average monthly income of around 1,000 yuan, about 140 USD. In 2005, according to the World Bank's standards, there were 150 million people living in extreme poverty in mainland China. After years of significant change under the Chinese Communist Party, the gap between rich and poor has only widened.